This video is sponsored by Graven Guild and their new campaign, Imperia Hexica.
Previously on our channel, we created this fantasy world using Hexton Hill tiles to create a map. But now, we have something new to make.
We're going to be making a massive sci-fi world 3 to 4 times bigger than this one because Graven Guild have come up with a new campaign called Imperia Hexica, which is basically a fully compatible tile set for all of your sci-fi gaming needs.
So in this video, we're going to be making our own tile set that's going to be revolved around the miniature world that we're creating, including Kindred of the Abyss.
It's going to be really exciting to share this world with you, but it's time to plan out the map that we're going to make this huge, tiny world.
So tiny.
Let's do it!
Yay!
Tabletop time!
Tabletop time.
Ah! So, we're going to talk a little bit about the world we're creating and some of the factions that are in it. Now, this isn't going to be the entire world, just a snapshot. So, we want to use a lot of biomes. Where should we start? The coast? The Kindred?
Yes.
We already know we want to make the coast for the Kindred really rough, a bit like the Irish coast or English coast. So we're thinking lots of rocky cliffs, lots of dark grass, very dour. So moving up from the Kindred, we have our next faction that are going to be coming out, who are the Sisters of the Old Blood. I reckon up here we'll have a big monastery of the Sisters. They live in these massive monastery cities that rise high into the sky, kind of inspired a bit by Bloodborne. We can have the glorious, towering city of the Old Blood. What's next? Moving across.
The Valkyries.
Yes.
Yes. Our sort of Valkyries, which actually live in orbit in like a space station that was more or less left alone by the whole cataclysm that rocked this planet. But yes, they descend into the mountains here. But I think the idea that there's a bunch of human settlements that sort of come up there and await for them to descend is kind of cool. So I like that. So there'll be some little settlements.
So these are sci-fi, but there's also a massive amount of desert and wasteland biomes in there that are going to be really good for all games. And I think up from the Valkyries, we can do the tech worshippers. So these are a bunch of scrap gathering people who worship ancient technology that's half buried. They don't really know how to use it, but they attempt to utilize it in whatever form it can be found in. So for them, we're going to represent a lot of archaeology. So we'll use some mines, quarries, maybe some mountain range here that's sort of there's an amazing tile of like a big drill that's cutting into it as they're sort of digging and destroying the landscape and turning it into a bit of a wasteland.
Up from here, we're gonna go straight to the corner. Over here, cyberpunk, rockabilly, bikers. They live in one place, it's surrounded by desert. They have to use their bikes to traverse basically the entire land to get out, and that is where they live.
So we have amazing new salt plains tiles. We also have desert tiles. We also have wasteland tiles, and I think that's gonna lead into a little mountain range down here. Down here, we're going to have the war punks, these scrappy little war orphans, a bit of tank girl vibes, and they all live in a chemical wasteland, literally a trash dump full of like green glowing radioactive waste, which of course isn't a real thing, but they live in old military bunkers. So that's where they get the kind of military vibe from. So there's a few really cool facilities from this set, the sci-fi tiles that are a lot of military emplacements, and we're gonna use them. That'll be the home of the war punks. That's a vague idea of what we're gonna do. Let's go look at all the tiles we can play with and start to print stuff off. And we're gonna take them all and paint through the sections, and we're gonna tell you a little bit about the lore behind the world. So all the Graven Guild tiles from this campaign and the previous campaign all come in a variety of ways. You've got tabbed, tabless, and they all have magnet slots, and they're also pre-supported for printing on resin printers, but they're also available in FDM printing. So we're gonna showcase some of these unprinted just so you can see what they look like, and I'm also going to print off a couple in FDM so you can see what it looked like with an FDM printer at home. And while I get them going, Murray and Jen can start painting up some of these tiles. Let's see what they're doing first.
So for the first world that I am going to try and paint up and portray on this gigantic map is the Kindred of the Abyss. Now, you guys have pretty much seen everything that we've done from the Kindred, so I already have a really easy job of having this imagined because, well, we've already created most of the world. So, yay for me. We also did a Kindred of the Abyss board, which I helped paint as well, and I was really happy with how that turned out. So I'm gonna take some of the aesthetic and style from that video and then translate it over onto these tiles. Now, obviously, the Kindred live underwater, so that's kind of hard to represent here because we can't see what's under the water. However, there are these tiles of a coastline which will work perfectly well. Now, for most of these pieces, the cliff faces are quite tall, meaning that I didn't have to do too many beaches, and I feel like there wouldn't be too many lovely beaches around this area, but instead we're going to transition into a foresty area. Land being near water typically means plants and stuff are going to grow, so doing a nice little blend to indicate a forest is a nice transition into some other parts of this map. The colors I used also worked really well in creating this dark and stormy ocean, again contrasting back to that original board we had made. These were the first tiles that I worked on for this project, and I'm super happy with how they turned out.
So as I said earlier in our gloriously illustrated map session, I'm doing the bikers area, which is going to be their sort of refuge city in the middle of a giant desert. And so my bikers must leave their sort of refuge city and go out into the world using their bikes to traverse the great barren wastelands here. And so I'm going to start with all these deserts and salt plains, which will be really, really nice and give a bit of variance in such a dead land. And to help really differentiate these areas a bit, I'm going to have the deserts be quite a strong yellow, which will also help contrast off some of the unfortunate animals that have died and left their bones in the desert here. And then the salt plains themselves, as salt plains are, going to be quite white, a stark color, but I'm going to mix in a soft salmon pink just to get that sort of interesting effect as the light plays across their surface. Now, of course, amongst all this desert is the city itself. And for our map, we're just going to have it on the border. It's going to be quite large, but not too big. We want some settlements to be larger than others. Not all these factions are going to be continent-spanning empires. And so I'm going to use a single tile to represent the city here, using the Graven Guild stackers to create the appearance of this big wall encompassing the entire city. It's going to build up, and then I'm going to top it with this sort of factory, which is going to represent the larger structures towards the middle. As this honestly isn't quite the aesthetic that I want for the bikers in the end, but I also don't have it fully established in my own mind. But this will work as a perfect placeholder until I work out what I want. For the city itself, I want to go for a very clean burnished metal. None of that degrading metal here. Everything here is going to be spick, span, and reflective, with of course all the effects of the sand creeping up towards the lower half of the wall. So I'll add some pigment to the lower half of the walls as the final garnish. And now that's all looking quite nice and inhospitable, I'm going to start working on the wastelands here, which are starting to veer into the machine cultists territory. Now, the machine cultists are exactly that. Cultists that are obsessed with the ancient relics that are scattered around this post-apocalyptic landscape. They go around digging them up, trying to unearth their secrets, and basically try and reconstruct them all. You can see from the tiles we've selected here, they live in a very sort of scavenger lifestyle, ramshackle constructed hab blocks. So we've chosen these tiles that have these really modular buildings on them that all just sort of slap together. They set up these big archaeological dig sites and try and grab whatever they can and basically bolt it together. And they end up with these awful bastardizations of the ancient technology. Now, one cool thing that is spreading across all these areas and that all the different races are sort of trying to get are these weird crystals, which conveniently exist on quite a few of these tiles, which allow you to really go with a theme between all the different lands and environments. And for our world, we're definitely thinking of some sort of universal power or resource that all the factions are trying to fight over to power their various homes, machines, or weapons. And so while it's not quite set in stone, these crystals will be a really nice representation of what we want to establish here. And so with these magical crystals on the forefront of what the machine cultists are all digging up, I'm going to go with a nice, strong, vibrant purple, as that sort of screams magic, and it's going to stand out so nicely on top of all these different environments. Especially as you can see here, the machine cultists who have found this ancient ruin have built all over it and are harvesting this particularly large crystal. The mountains will be bordering the south side of my deserts, and I also want them to start blending in with the wastelands as well. So I'm going to use the same brown I used to base coat the wastelands into the mountains, going up into a more green. They'll give the nice imitation of mossy rocks, and then of course moving over to dry brushing grays to create that real rocky effect. As going from brown to a green to gray will give that really nice gradiated appearance of something that's a bit more lush, still ending up cold and desolate.
So have you been wanting to do a hex crawl for one of your role-playing games, or perhaps a campaign map for wargaming? In their first campaign, Graven Guild made the perfect product for that. And now for all the fans of sci-fi, Imperia Hexica is here. These industrial tiles, military bases, spire cities, and wasteland biomes will be perfect not only for your science fiction settings, but also for expanding to your original fantasy sets. Or if you're making a unique world like we are, using both and creating a hybrid world that has elements of fantasy and elements of science science fiction. The tiles all come pre-supported or unsupported and are suitable for resin or FDM printing. And I was particularly impressed with how well the FDM prints came out on our printers. These new tiles will be added to their amazing free web app, and that will be further refined through stretch goals as the campaign progresses. We would love it if you could go and check out Hexton Hills. It really is something that we love. We love the idea of these campaign maps, and it's helping with our world building. So go check out the links in the description and back the campaign to get access to all these awesome files. So the bottom left corner of our world map is going to belong to the Warpunks. Now, we've talked about these a few times and we've seen some concept art for them, but the Warpunks in our world are a bunch of orphan kids, basically inspired by things like the Goonies, the Lost Boys, Tank Girl, Metal Slug for the military aesthetic, and also just general punk and 80s sort of teen culture. They're satirical and irreverent, maybe a little bit Borderlands as well, as these crazy kids live in the absolute worst place imaginable. They've made their home on the other side of a toxic waste dump and managed to find some ancient and very powerful military bunkers. And inside they found all of the tools and advantages they need to compensate for the areas they lack, like age and maturity. Campaign 2 from Graven Guild has some fantastic tiles that are perfect for this, including chemical waste pools and geothermal pools. This will allow me to make a nice gradient from those more normal areas with the geothermal hot springs and then move into the more horrible and disgusting chemical wastes. The area is nestled into a mountain, but this tile set also has some fantastic military bunkers and bases. All of these painted up will represent the entrances to those mountain complexes and the highly militarized facilities that the Warpunks or Warfans often inhabit. Paint all of these, I'm going to be going for browns with some green washes. This is going to tint the whole area of the map and make it feel just a little bit uneasy and off. For the pools of chemicals, I'm going to mix some Viejo Vomit paint with some bright neon green. This technical will keep a nice blobby sheen to everything, but the green will help bring the color a lot closer to toxic waste. You can pick out all the details, mechanical areas such as barrels, and make everything nice, rusty, and worn, because the last thing a bunch of teenagers want to do is home maintenance. As for the military buildings themselves, they're all painted in a classic olive drab. For the Warfans, we want to go for that almost Vietnam era classic American US militaria vibe, as I think that resonates the most with the war/anti-war sentiment we're going with here. So with me painting all these together, I can bring it up to the mountain range that is going to separate them to the north from the deserts and across to the east where the Valkyries will be.
So the next tiles that I needed to paint up were the Sisters of the Old Blood. Now, I am very excited and obviously personally invested in how I wanted this to look aesthetically. Of course, I drew massive inspiration from the game Bloodborne and even looked up a few photos on the colors that I could use. For that really nice gothic feel, I went with darker colors with just that hint of purple going into pink. And of course, personally, I also love using pink too, so there's a bit of a me that I'm putting into this project as well. The Sisters of the Old Blood, again inspired by the game Bloodborne. Their civilization is based on a giant hive city, but keeping in with those gothic and cathedral themes. And these tiles fit that aesthetic absolutely perfectly. I'd like to think that the city itself is quite squished and crammed in, which is why we only used 3 of these specific tiles. And of course, the one in the middle being the tallest. I like to imagine that all of the windows in this city are stained glass. However, I really didn't want to paint miniature windows, and instead I found a nice shimmery paint that worked pretty well and also contrasted nicely with the purple. Now, not everyone in this civilization gets to live in the also beautiful Gothic towers. No, our peasants have to live somewhere, don't they? So they live on the outskirts of the town in these little villages and are not as well protected as the ones inside the city. But someone needs to take the job of protecting the main city and unfortunately getting eaten first. So yay for them. Overall, this part of the map is going to be quite small and condensed. They don't own a whole lot of area of mass. They don't really sprawl out. But either way, I think these tiles fit my aesthetic absolutely perfectly, and I'm super happy with how these turned out.
So the last faction in our starting lineup is the Valkyries. And when we're thinking about a game board and terrain where they can live, these are the hardest ones because they actually live up in an orbital amusement park, or what was once an orbital amusement park. Yes, remember, this world might be post-apocalyptic post-apocalyptic, but it was sci-fi at one stage. And the Valkyries descend from on high with valorous ideals learnt from holograms and inspirational children's rides, turned into a religion and culture taken seriously and with reverence. So when we're representing that on a tabletop, it's actually a little bit hard. They don't really have established settlements. However, where they do arrive, throngs of people they rescue often create towns, totems, and shrines, basically praying for their assistance in the future. Conveniently for them, lightning can strike twice in the same place, as the Valkyries often descend to the same locations, finding good little orbital corridors to get down there. To represent where the Valkyries land, we're actually using a couple of tiles that were released in the first campaign, and these tiles are really good for games. They have this flat circular area allowing you to put tokens in them, and I can think of a lot of resource management based games that these are really upgrade. Settlers of Hexton Hills, anyone? However, for our purposes, these circular indents actually look really eerie, and I can kind of imagine some kind of teleport beam or signal just shearing the ground flat, literally removing the previous mountaintops and establishing where the Valkyries arrive. The second tile is actually built in a town. It's a stone platform, and here it makes perfect sense that the villagers who pray for their arrival have effectively built a platform for the Valkyries to arrive at. For the rest of this area of the map, it is basically blending mountain and forest across to the wastelands up above, and also where the scrap warpunks are. So it's a little bit of a blendy area, lots of environmental tiles, but all of those pieces will pull the whole map together, fill out the middle. But there's one more thing we need to do before we can call the project finished.
There's just one problem. This sort of jagged hexagonal edging, if you're creating a campaign, basically adding tiles one by one, that can be really cool and exciting. But if you want a finished product, something that looks really neat and nice, you might want something a bit extra. Or if you're a group of brain-addled YouTubers, you want it to look really nice for the reveals coming up. So what we have also printed here is some awesome edging parts that fill in the gaps here. They can go on the side, and then suddenly there's a nice flush area. Isn't that brilliant? That of course means that there's a bit of extra work for us to do, and we can make this just a little bit fancy. And it is that time of the video as we pass lovingly over this world that we have created with our own hands and a resin printer that we wish to thank all of our patrons, for it is you that allow us to keep doing what we do and what we love. It is legitimately a huge support to this channel. We could not do it without you. And it is also just a whole lot of fun to get to talk to you all, see what you're all working on in your own hobby-related things at home. And if you'd like to join us in some banter or just support us financially if you wish, you can find the links in the description below. And there we have it. We've completed this huge map.
Yay! Of our little world. I'm so excited to be able to see it, like, realize, like, this is really, really cool.
Yeah, it's actually a really good brainstorming way for like creating worlds.
Like, it's in a frame, so we could glue this onto like some MDF and then like hang it on a wall.
Man and wall, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it would be super, super cool.
Absolutely. And like there's even more tiles that we could have possibly used in this video, despite the fact that we made such a big one. It's, as we said at the start, it's like 4 times as big as our original one. So if you want to have a look at what these guys have to offer, check out Hexton Hills, Graven Guild. It's all fantastic. And as you see, you can put it all together and it works perfectly well. So thanks so much for Hexton Hills for sponsoring us and letting us build this huge world that literally we're going to use in the future.
And you may be wondering, where's Dave? Well, he's not here.
We kicked him out.
Yeah, so stay tuned because that will be upcoming in another video.
Yeah, but in the meantime, thanks to patrons, thanks to our sponsor, and we'll see you in the next video.
Okay, I'm sick of standing on my toes now.
Were you on your toes? So I should have stayed at the back.
Hello!